Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to my channel. This weekend was the release of DC Warner Brothers' Shazam film, and the general consensus seems to be that it's a good film. People are talking about having a lot of fun at the theater and talking about the well-told story or whatever. I'm, of course, not going to watch it myself. I've talked about this before, because I'm just not interested in that version of the character. There's some key differences at the foundation there that are kind of a deal breaker for me when it comes to a Captain Marvel Shazam story. And then you have people say, why? Oh, you didn't give it a chance. It's just a fun movie. I don't need to watch just a fun movie. I don't need that in my life right now. And if I did, there are other fun movies I could watch. The character that I've known and loved over the decades is dear to me, and I don't want to see a version come in and completely rework that. So I try to explain this to people, but people become very, very insecure and extremely irate when anyone dares articulate a dissenting opinion from their own. And that's a whole other psychological can of worms there. But what I wanted to focus this video on is not only the Shazam film, but this phenomenon that we've seen happen for a long time now. And I've been talking about this for a while, ever since I started the channel. I usually point out that these characters, these mythological characters in the public consciousness, they will not be mishandled but for so long. And that is usually the case, especially for the characters like a Superman or somebody like that who's really got such a hold on the public consciousness. But there is a way to kill that, even with the characters who are strong, if the storytellers, if cultural forces insist upon doubling down and pushing and pushing and pushing. And I've talked a little bit about this in the Joker video I made recently, and maybe the Star Wars video I did this past week as well. I quote often the wonderful Alvin Schwartz statement about Tulpa Superman and how occasionally wrong-headed, ill-conceived notions of the character will persist for a time, but the real Superman, the real deal, the iconic Tulpa Superman, will always come back and reaffirm and reassert himself as he means to be. And how that works is just because that's how we need him to be as a culture. So cultural feedback, cultural reactions to what's being done with the character will eventually, if they're being listened to, will eventually reassert and reaffirm characters in their more iconic state. Now, this process can be thwarted, though, and it will be thwarted by storytellers who insist, for, like I said, whatever cultural reasons, whatever cultural tensions, on refusing to listen to the audience and pushing their ideas of this character, their conception of it, usually according to some agenda or pride or something like that. So let me start talking about some specifics. And I'll give you some examples, and with each example, I'll try to say what culture loses by losing some of these characters. So we've been talking a lot about the Captain Marvel Brie Larson film. Let's talk about the original Carol Danvers for a second. Not the Kelly Sue DeConnick remake gender studies Carol Danvers, but the original Carol Danvers. She was an incredible character. She was really great. She was welcomed by fans. She was a strong woman in the sense of that second wave feminism idea of strong women. And she was a great character. She embraced her femininity. Her costume was very sexy, and she embraced that. But she wasn't like other characters either. She wasn't just like a Wonder Woman or something like that. She was her own character and had her own arc, and many great stories were told with her. One of the things that was really important, a great portrayal of her character. Everyone has ever seen the Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. It was the animated film, or animated series rather, that was done for the Avengers right before Disney took over, and then they quashed that so they could do their own thing. But it was really a great series, and part of the series was telling the origin of Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel. They didn't call her Captain Marvel or anything like that, but in that series, you got a glimpse, a real distillation of the character and some of the great things that she's been in the comics, because now you have this character who's always been a military person all of her life, and then she's working for SWORD, in the space there and stuff, and she's conflicted. She has these powers now, and she's inspired by people like Captain America and the Avengers themselves. She's inspired by people who will use their powers to be a hero out there in the world, but she's conflicted between also needing to be a good soldier and following the chain of command. So quite often she has to decide, do I do this over here, which I know to be right with these powers, or do I do what I'm ordered to because I've given my consent to this greater chain of command, already, and if I don't understand it, that's not necessarily an excuse. And that was an interesting conflict for her character. It was an interesting arc for her to have, and that was great. She had weaknesses. She made mistakes at times, but her journey was an interesting one. When Kelly Sue DeConnick rewrote the character, and this is the version that we have in the Captain Marvel film, this is a character who can make no mistakes. This is a character who is a poster child for a political agenda, for a social agenda of gender deconstruction and intersectional third wave feminism and all of that. She can make no mistakes, and the whole film is just different ways that the plot can be maneuvered to pull back different layers of how amazing she is. And that's it. That's it. So we've lost that wonderful conflicted character that could really tell us a lot about the dueling obligations we have to our own sense of justice and to the structures of society. That was a fascinating take. That's gone now. That's gone now for Carol Danvers. Now, as much as I like the original Carol Danvers, that's not the biggest, that's not going to crumble our culture because we no longer have the original Carol Danvers. It sucks. It's horrible, but that's not going to kill us altogether, right? You can have other characters that'll do something like that. Let's look at Shazam himself, the real Captain Marvel, Billy Batson into Shazam. One of the key differences, in fact, the real key difference, the reason why I'm just not interested in the new film's take, is because they are going off of like I've said before, the Jeff Johns New 52 design of the character, the complete and total reimagining of this character. And the key difference that Jeff Johns introduced in the New 52, the key difference of the New 52 Shazam, is that Billy Batson is no longer this young, pure-hearted, essentially good in every way little boy who's given this power because of his pure heart. Now, he's a teenager. He's an angsty teenager. He's jaded. He's edgy. He's disrespectful. He's chosen by the wizard now because he stands up for people, and he wants to kind of stand up for people and do what's right. Now that's not a bad story in its own right. That's good. You should stand up for people, and that's a fine thing to do. But let's look at what's lost, because everybody always comes up to me and tries to try to justify this new version of the character and why it makes sense and blah 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 blah. That's not the point. That's not the point. What's the point is that if you wanted to tell that kind of story, go tell that kind of story. Why was the original pristine archetype here, why was that completely broken down and deconstructed in order to tell this different, edgier, darker, more sarcastic, bitter version of the story? In the comics, this is because of the New 52. People sometimes will attack me and say, you talk about being comics accurate, but then you say it's just the New 52. Well, the New 52 was comics too, so there's just comics you don't like, and that's just, that nullifies your argument. No, look at history. When I talk about these characters in their iconic state, I'm talking about decades upon decades. Once these characters formed in the public consciousness, once they became who we wanted them to be, their personality remained remarkably consistent over decades. Now, even with the changes in their stories, as I've said before, little tweaks to their origins or little tweaks to their stories as it happens here and there. Some changes come and go. DC will have a crisis or whatever that comes and goes. But through all of that, from a couple years after they were created, once they fully formed, you look at Superman, for example, so about 1940-ish or whatever, whenever you can say he was fully formed into who he came to be as the bastion of America's truth, justice, and the American way. From that point on until 2011, practically the whole century there, this character remained consistent and steady in his personality. Even amidst all the changes that were going around with him, with a crisis or continuities or whatever, his personality, who he was at the core, remained consistent. And that's the case for all these DC characters that truly became ingrained in the social consciousness. What happened in 2011, the New 52 was not DC Comics listening to the feedback from the fans and trying to mold these characters in accordance with the public's feedback. No. The New 52 was a forced reboot, a forced reimagining from the ground up, from the core out of all of these characters. The Superman from the New 52 is simply not the same character anymore. The Wonder Woman from New 52 is not the same character, and so on. That is not, that's just a different version in comics, and you can just like one or the other. No, this is a difference. There's a difference in the motivation of this reboot. I don't know why people can't understand this. This was, Dan DiDio had a major part in it because he had just wanted for so long to make the DC universe darker. He's sick with envy, as I've said before, to be Marvel Comics. He wants to be Marvel. He wants to be edgy. He wants to be darker. And this is what he's after. And with the New 52, that was his chance to really shine. And it brought in a lot of spectacle sales. It was the first time ever the DC universe had completely rebooted without a crisis or anything. Just boom, from the ground up, reimagining all these characters. And that was a big deal. Now, it didn't last because that kind of envisioning of these characters does not resonate. It doesn't matter if a few people come in and say, well, I like this or that. Well, of course you did. That's fine. People are going to like this or that. But the point is, and it's just an objective fact, that it did not resonate with culture on a whole. And that's why comic sales began to plummet. That's why DC higher-ups had to come back in and again force a reboot and bring in the DC Rebirth. That's the problem. That's what's happening here. So, a young Billy Batson, who is a young child, completely pure of heart, he has gone through a pretty wretched childhood. He was orphaned. He's been batted around from foster family to foster family. Eventually, he's on his own, living on the streets, and really struggling to make it, struggling to eat, struggling to stay warm. In spite of all of that, this young boy, this young child, maintains a pure heart and refuses to be bitter. He is kind to everyone he meets. He's not snarky. He's not, like I said, he's not jaded. He's not bitter. And in the original version of the character, the wizard is attracted to choosing the young Billy Batson because of how he's protected his heart. There's a great line in the Superman Shazam story arc in which Billy says, I'm no hero. I can't protect anybody. I'm powerless. And the wizard says, no, the important thing is you protected your heart. You have not grown bitter. You have not grown jaded. That's what a true aspirational hero needs at their core. Power comes and goes. The desire to protect, of course, that needs to be there, but that's secondary to the core. The core aspiration, you can't be somebody who's going to be selfish and jaded and easily discouraged and whatnot. You need to have that aspirational core for the aspirational archetype, which is what the Captain Marvel Shazam Billy Batson character is. He's an aspirational hero. New 52 didn't like that. As I said, Dan DiDio's trying to make everything far darker. So that's why we have the revamped Shazam of New 52, who's now a teenager. We had to age him up because teenagers are cool. They're darker, they're edgier, they're jaded, they're sarcastic. And now we'll just have this idea of him wanting to protect people. And that's what the wizard kind of hangs this decision on to give him the power of Shazam. Something's lost there. I don't know how people can't understand this. Something's lost there because now you're taking this character who has embodied this aspirational archetype for so long. And it's because of his pure heart, because of the idea that he would never allow himself to grow jaded. That's a big deal. And that's aspirational because so few of us can really achieve that. The aspirational archetype is supposed to be the standard. It doesn't have to be realistic. It's the standard that we strive to. We fail, but we strive for it nonetheless so that we can come up all the higher for striving for something that is that much higher. That's the idea behind an aspirational character. So when you replace that just simply with, just wanting to protect the innocent, that's good enough. Now that's laudable, of course, but that's not enough. Anybody can start with protecting the innocent, but if the core aspirational heart, if the core resistance to becoming jaded and bitter isn't there, then that can go very poorly, very quickly. And we've seen that happen in the New 52 run of Shazam a number of times. It's a completely different character. It truly is. And that is the character they chose to turn around this movie for. So that's fine if people like that, whatever, but it's important to understand what is lost. Now, with Shazam, or with the Captain Marvel Shazam, Billy Batson, not a lot of people know about the original iconic character throughout the decades. Not a lot, maybe they know his name, maybe they know some general ideas. They've watched the old 70s show or something like that. But for the most part, not a comparatively large amount of people really understand what the character was and what he did for us. So Shazam being changed isn't going to completely wreck culture either, but it still is a true shame, especially for those of us who really did love the character as he was iconically. But the more people start just kind of shrugging off these little changes and these little things that are lost, maybe it doesn't really hurt things too much to lose a traditional Carol Danvers. Maybe it doesn't wreck culture to lose a traditional Billy Batson. But the more you just shrug those little changes off and the more you allow the heroes of the superhero universe is to completely fall, for their iconic versions to fall aside and be replaced by these new edgier, darker, whatever versions, there will be a tangible change felt eventually, because eventually it comes around to some of the big heavy pillar characters like a Superman, like a Wonder Woman and such. People are already trying to argue that Superman can, he has to take some time to learn, all these values, because, he can't just be good from the start. That's just unrealistic. Well, that is a complete and total lack of understanding of mythology, how it works, and how the aspirational archetype is at play. Look at Luke Skywalker. Most people watching the new films, who aren't really big Star Wars fans, who aren't going to necessarily go back and watch all the old ones, they don't know or care about Luke Skywalker. I talked about that in the Star Wars video. He's just some old guy who gives up on people and, kind of comes back at the end and makes the right decision and then dies, whatever. There's nothing J.J. Abrams can do to redeem that. You would have to undo it or not. That character damage has been done, no matter what cool things he might do as a Force ghost, or if he really wasn't dead later, or some such thing like that. These characters are being fundamentally altered in the public consciousness, and once they're fundamentally altered, they're no longer there. They're no longer there because we who remember them will eventually die off. And then the generations to come are left with these deconstructed versions of these characters. When our generation was just too jaded and too discouraged and too lazy to try and strive for anything decent, that all we could do is just deconstruct everything around us. And then that leaves generations to come with nothing to cling on to and everything to have to construct on their very own. That's a real step backwards for society and for culture. That's what's lost with these films. And it doesn't matter if you like this movie or like that movie or like the version of it or whatever. Something's still lost, and it's important to consider that and to consider the effect of, again, just one more thing being lost. At some point, you have to stop just going along with the flow and standing up for the characters and saying, no, this dark, edgy choice, this other thing you're doing over there, no matter how cool it sounds, no matter how many flashy accoutrements you have on it, no matter how many little jokes or whatever, it's not a proper handling of the character. And at some point, we need to stop. Where's the line? We need to eventually say, no, certain characters need to be handled appropriately as they've been shaped and molded by our culture for a century. So that's really my answer to people who would ask me why I'm not going to see Shazam, why I'm not interested in the Aquaman movies and so forth. People have every right to follow their own tastes, of course, like what they like, and that's fine, but I do take issue with people who try to pretend that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if different version, it's just a different version. That is a ignorant assertion. That simply isn't the case. That's not how mythology works, that's not how culture works, it's not how society works, it's not how psychology works. That's all for this video. I will be returning with some reviews of a few comics and indie comics and whatnot. Do check out my own graphic novel on Indiegogo, see the ad at the end of the video. Thanks for clicking like and subscribe and sharing it with friends, and until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the hero stories you love. Thanks for watching. Do you like comics that are unafraid to portray women as feminine and men as masculine? Do you enjoy being entertained rather than preached to? If so, then you'll love my own graphic novel, currently on Indiegogo. Tales from the Stacks is an anthology series in the vein of The Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt. It contains 3 uncanny tales to thrill and haunt you long after reading. With interior art by Dave T. and variant covers by John Malin, Kyle Ritter, and Kyung Lee, you have lots of options to choose from. You can find the link in the description below or search Indiegogo for Tales from the Stacks. And tell the comic industry you don't have to settle for their social agenda platforming. Thanks. And last but not least, don't forget that your Professor Geek now has a merch store. Check out the current options from t-shirts to magnets to the iconic Professor Geek coffee mug, and let me know if you'd like to see something else. The link is in the description, or you can go to cafepress.com/ProfessorGeek.